para que este espacio funcione, tenemos un acuerdo con el doctor García de hacerlo en inglés. De otra manera, no podría realmente administrar el intercambio de ideas. De manera que en este momento me voy a pasar a inglés, and I'm going to welcome you to this space. The title for this year's challenge is the following: turning joint arthroplasty into a commodity. Are we right on target or falling victim to our own invention? For this very challenging subject, we have invited Dr. Thorsten Gerke from the Endo Clinic. Welcome, Thorsten, once again to this space. Dr. David Lewallen. Hi, I'm going to go right through the names. Dr. David Lewallen from the Mayo Clinic, Dr. Javad Parvisi from Rothman, Frank Picaluga from Hospital Italiano in Buenos Aires, and Kelly Vince, who's a senior medical officer at the Northland District Health Board in New Zealand. And I'll be your moderator, Adolfo Ginás from Colombia, working for Julio, which is always very nice. To introduce this very unusual subject, I'm going to go through a few slides. So the audience up to speed. We've been debating about this subject or exchanging ideas with the panelists for a couple of days. Here's what we sort of put on the table. This panel, Julio, is based on this hypothesis, which is the foundation for this debate. We, I mean us, anybody who's in this panel, the medical organizations, the key opinion leaders and providers, have unintentionally turned total joint arthroplasty into a commodity. This is the hypothesis for our debate. Let's go into the definition of a commodity. It's an economic good that has full or substantial fungibility. This is an unusual word. In Spanish, it's fungibilidad. It comes from the word fungible. So fungibility is the property of a commodity where individual units are essentially interchangeable, and each of its parts is indistinguishable from another part. I'll explain myself. Here are the consequences. Now, the market treats the commodities as equivalent, so with no regard to who produced them. The price of a commodity, or the price of the good, is typically determined as a function of its market and not necessarily as a function of the effort or the cost. Now, the wide availability of commodities typically leads to smaller profit margins and diminishes the importance of factors such as the brand name, whether the joint replacement comes from Rothman or a local competitor, or Mayo, or some integrated group of practitioners around the corner, or from Hospital Italiano or its competition. But it's not the price that determines what the commodity actually is valued in the market for. Let me use a recent example to explain the case. Now, over the last 6 or 7 months, we have been listening about ICUs and ventilators. These are the two most recent examples of items or procedures or very complex integrated processes like caring for a patient at the ICU to be turned into a commodity. Now, politicians and public administrators have been announcing the number of ICU beds available. So we have 100 ICUs. Tomorrow we have 120 ICUs, and we are looking for more ICUs, or we're importing more ventilators or fabricating or getting ventilators lent to us. But we have not heard about quality We haven't heard the mayor of New York concerned about the quality of the outcomes of ICUs or the quality or the spectrum of capacities of ventilators. So for the purpose of the public, a ventilator is a ventilator and any ICU is equivalent. The public has accepted the concept without challenging the assumption that they are not equivalent. The public expects now optimal and identical results from every ICU or every ventilator, as if there were not a monumental spread in outcomes or capacity. But challenge your family members about this, and you'll find that they think an ICU is an ICU, a ventilator is a ventilator. And they actually think you can install a single ventilator in a village, as if it were not part of a larger process. Now, if this hypothesis is correct, we, the members of this panel and the extended audience, have done away with the differentiators that the high quality performers achieve. And we've created a mass of falsely equivalent products from the perspective of the insurers and patients. And it's no wonder that they think that a joint replacement is like another joint replacement. And I'm sure you've all faced the conversation of, I cannot have surgery with you. Can you recommend somebody that is like you in this hospital, which is not like your hospital? And that's an awkward conversation. And here's the final take on this hypothesis, an additional dimension to the problem. It's our relentless obsession with increasing the surgical volume to make up for decreasing margins has sent the message to the public that joint arthroplasty has an additional quality of commodities. And this is that it can be mass produced. So we talk about hundreds of joint replacements being contracted against a price that must be executed within a time margin. And this, of course, once again brings in the issue of the commodity. Now, I'm going to pose the question, and then I'm going to switch to the panel slide so we can see each other, or at least I can see you. And here's the first question that I'm going to pose to you. And this question will be the center of our debate for the remaining minutes. And the question is, do you agree that we have converted joint arthroplasty into a commodity? And if you disagree, I mean, how do you explain the lack of variable reimbursement despite demonstrations of superior hard outcomes, efficiency, and better experience of care? And if you agree, how do you suggest we communicate to the public boldly that there is a large variation in quality and outcomes? So these are this is the question and the two dimensions of this question that I propose that we followed during this discussion. So I'm going to start with Dr. Llewellyn. And it's good to see you again. It's good to see you again, sir. And do you agree with the hypothesis, Dr. Llewellyn? I'm sure Mayo is it's a very powerful brand. And do you face these challenges? Do you think there is substance in this hypothesis?
No question. I think it's a big problem. It's partly, as you have pointed out, we're a victim of our own success in that we have achieved highly successful results for arthroplasty broadly across the community. Not that there aren't still problems, but the results are largely positive. And many of the problems that we see are not apparent to the public because even a poorly performed implant in bad position with bad technique that will loosen early works pretty well for a number of years. And so the initial results, even with some not so well done implants, seem pretty good to the consumer. Like a car that breaks at 2 years. For the first 2 years, it seems pretty good, but it's not a Mercedes, huh? Thorsten, it doesn't go forever with a huge resale value, right? So I think that's an issue since the consumer does not have the tools to really judge the product. And this is a continuing problem in this overall discussion. And interestingly, on the other side of it, their perception of the value of the good is much higher than what is generally reimbursed. So people have done surveys here in the US and asked patients, what do you think the surgeon gets for the total hip or the total knee that you have just received? And certainly for our Medicare patients, they always guess a number that is 3, 5, 10 times higher than the actual reimbursement, which is pretty uniformly around $1,500 here in the United States. My plumber gets more than that when he comes for a difficult problem and a leak because he charges by the hour. So by the time we get done with the parts and everything else. So this is a real issue. And so the question is, how do we move forward in a way that preserves the quality of care and really allows us to focus on the value of the care we provided? Value is outcomes over cost. And so our opportunity, I think, collectively, is to try to continue to drive for better and better outcomes with, the lowest possible cost, not compromising care. So we have to be bargain hunters and look for the deals in the processes of care that we provide and not spend money foolishly.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thorsten, do you face these challenges, and do you agree with the hypothesis?
I agree and I disagree, to be honest. I agree that there's a big danger to see the artoplasty as a commodity. But David just mentioned that it is that the consumers cannot judge really about the outcome. And here I more disagree because I think today we have so many internet platforms where you can see the quality, the outcome of the work of the hospitals, and especially as David said, the value. You can really judge about the value if you go into, at least here in Germany, we have many sites where you can see how the quality of each hospital is. Mainly published by insurances, to be honest. So the consumer, at least here, they can differentiate between a high and low quality hospital. But the problem is, at the end, the problem is not the consumer. At the end here, at least here in Germany, the problem are the politicians. They always want to get higher quality. They always want to get more specialized hospital and less non-specialized units. But at the end, they are all depending on the guys who are electing them. And that leads to the fact that they always wish better quality control, better outcome, better value of the hospitals. But at the end, when they have to say, this hospital in your area has to be closed because the outcome and the value is too low, then they step back and say, okay, stay here in my region where the people are living who are electing me. And so at the end, it makes nothing. But generally, it is possible for the consumers to judge about the value of an hospital because all our data in the meantime and outcome is published.
All right. Okay. Frank, you have been a divergent voice over the years in Latin America. and have rejected many of the trends, maintaining an individual position that I think we all admire. What is your take on this hypothesis?
Thank you, Adolfo. I will be speaking in English. So I do believe we have created here in Argentina that a commodity for total hip replacement. And I do agree with Thorsten that people get informed about it. They get informed by internet, and they get informed by voice to voice. Say, well, someone comes, say, I have a hip surgery performed and I've been 24 hours in the hospital, be walking on crutches immediately, and the other guy has been weak, 4 days, and couldn't walk until 2-3 weeks. So people know which hospital is better and which hospital will have a worse care of the patient. Saying so, at our hospital, we are paid by bundle. And there's a very, very big range of bundles in our hospital and in all the country. So, and our hospital they don't have publicity. The publicity is their doctors, their works, the conference, the congress, the meetings, everything. But the hospital doesn't appear on TV saying this is the best hospital. But we are very expensive for Argentina, which has its problems. So nobody wants to send a patient to see us. It's the patient who is asking to go to the hospital. And how do we to do things better or to win more money? We get better. We diminish stay of length. We diminish the cost of the prosthesis. Instead of 4 days, we've got 24 or day surgery. So you work on being better, which is being the difference with a commodity. We do believe that a surgeon makes a difference and an institution makes a difference, but you're expensive. And that I talked with my people, my younger people. Now I am almost retired, and I talk with Martina, and you know them all. Do you want to be a cheap, high-volume surgeon, or do you want to be an expensive surgeon with a little less surgeries every day? And you know the answer. We are Argentinians, we are South Americans, we don't like to work. So we are a little bit expensive surgeons who work a little bit less. Saying that, we are the highest volume hospital in Argentina. So yes, you've got we've created a commodity, but we still think that a surgeon makes a difference.
All right. So I'm welcoming now Dr. Kelly Vince. It's a joy to see you. It must be very late up there. Welcome, Dr. Vince. I think you've been listening to the debate. Do you want to give us our reading on this complex issue?
Adolfo, I'm assuming you can hear me. Is that correct?
That is correct, and it's a joyful experience.
You're one of the few people to say that. You know, when I worked in Los Angeles at University of Southern California, I would have understood this discussion and understood what all my friends are saying completely. But my situation now, where I'm a very active surgeon, and I work in the New Zealand's public health system exclusively. We also have a private system. What I'm hearing is sort of my friends and colleagues laboring under the tensions of schizophrenia, because what all of us are doing here with this lovely course every year and enjoying doing is actively trying to make knee arthroplasty or hip arthroplasty directly into a commodity. We're sitting here with all of our colleagues hoping to improve everyone's understanding. We're hoping to improve everyone's technique. We are hoping to improve everyone's outcome. So you're all sitting there. We're all sitting there trying to make very hard to make this into a commodity. Otherwise, why would we be doing this? And from my perspective in New Zealand, I dedicate most of my time, day in, day out, to making this into a commodity, to having uniform outcomes, to spending a lot of my time every day with the trainees, educational sessions, discussing with them, improving their technique, and in conjunction with the New Zealand Orthopedic Association, which is a very cohesive organization with a high level of training for all of the surgeons in the country, trying to do precisely that. Now, there is a parallel private system, and the way that the private system here distinguishes itself is a little bit the way we've just heard. There's no wait time, for example. The hospitals are nicer, they're more modern, they're more pleasant. It's like staying in a better quality hotel. But I would say when it comes to the surgery, we are all committed here to making this a high quality commodity uniformly.
So your response is that it's a system-based issue, and that it can be, if you work within a healthcare system that provides reasonable access and well-being in terms of the quality of the infrastructure of the hospitals, then you can always focus on doing it better, and that would be the only issue. Is that correct?
Yes, although the perspective I think we've heard, and it's one that I understand very well from Los Angeles, where I was in competition with other surgeons and other institutions, and I was responsible for maintaining the name brand of USC, Keck School of Medicine, the doctors of USC, that we were better than the community doctors, that we could attract more patients, because it really does become a volume issue. Because there's no surcharge. I mean, everyone pays the same for an arthroplasty in Los Angeles, really, in many respects, once you filter your way through the different kinds of healthcare systems. So if you're going to distinguish it in terms of outcome, I understand what David Llewellyn was saying about quality of outcome, durability of the prosthesis, but that's a tougher go. But what we've heard so far is from the perspective of the surgeons and the institutions. If we talk about it from the perspective of healthcare providers or a national healthcare provider, it's very different. I mean, I'm very concerned to see as many patients in our community who are on the waiting list for surgery have high quality outcomes, and we have tools for doing that, but we're actively trying to make it into a commodity.
Now, Thorsten practices in a country that has a national healthcare system that is reputed around the world, and they're able to draw patients internationally to strengthen their volume, their cash flow, and the prestige, and to be able to serve better. Which is, let's not forget that's our motivation. That's not on the table. We are here to serve. So. How do you react, Thorsten, to Dr. Kelly's response?
Yeah, it's at the end, there are not so many huge differences between New Zealand and Germany, I guess, but I think there are still huge differences between US and Germany. As Frank said, we are working also on bundles, or we call it DRG systems, where every kind of surgery is combined with a certain amount of money that we get for example, for a primary hip or a primary knee. So regarding payment or reimbursement here in Germany, we have absolutely no difference between high quality and low quality hospitals. So everybody gets the same. But here in Germany, we have the same kind of competition, as you have heard, they have in LA at the moment, or everywhere, I guess. Even in Buenos Aires, they compete with all the other big hospitals, or you in Bogota, you are also competing with all the other hospitals for the patients. And but the only parameter that differentiates you from other hospitals and makes you strong as a unit is quality, of course. And again, quality can be controlled. Quality is published already. We are on a project where we coming out with all the prompts. Many countries have registries where they publish the prompts. They publish their morbidity rate, their mortality rate of each surgeon. For example, in the UK, you can go into the internet and you can give the name in of a surgeon, and you can see how high his mortality rate is. So every country has tools like this, and again, the patient can choose where he wants to go on quite objective parameters, based on quite objective parameters. And that's, in my opinion, a very good situation at the moment, and that makes and that leads to the fact that commodity is not so strong in many countries. At least here, commodity is not really an issue, because the patient can every patient can see how the quality of a certain unit is, and so I do not see this problem here in my country so much. Probably in some other countries it's more difficult. And I'd like to hear how it is, for example, in Colombia, for example, in your country. How do you deal with this problem, Adolfo? How do you make your hospital strong and keep it away from some kind of commodity?
We're working on that answer. It's very difficult. Our most recent interpretation is that we have a very poor communication and a poor understanding of what is relevant to patients. Our definition of value, we have a value equation that has hard outcomes on the top, on the nominator. It has experience of care in the nominator also, and it has in the denominator efficiency or effort. And we're adding on the right of that equation, which is a quotient, a multiplier, which is convenience. We are surprised as to how much patients somehow appreciate convenience, and they assume that everything else has been taken care for. And we believe that that's one of the reasons that they exchange hospitals and value propositions without regard or depth in their analysis of where they're going to have a procedure. And despite how much we try to convey the concept on the hard numbers, on the hard side, and we provide outcomes and we make them transparent in this modern conception of the word, and we send them information, somehow they have more interest in how convenient it is to have the procedure, and they assume and demand and expect that everything else is perfect. We have a national healthcare system in Colombia, and we have some issues that I will address because we have a question from one of our Colombian surgeons. But we're trying to understand, Thorsten, that if we build a high level of convenience into the way we care for patients, then they would allow us to deliver the hard part of our value proposition, that is where we think the importance lies. So I've had experience working with prompts, Thorsten, because as you may remember, I work with patients with hemophilia, and this is one of the areas where prompts have developed many years ago. And even when we deliver prompts in hemophilia, patients, that's not what they really want. It's very difficult. I remember once at a current concepts meeting where you were, they were having a discussion about bearing surfaces and nanoparticles and wear. And the moderator went through the whole panel asking, how they had conversations about ceramic versus metal on polyethylene. And the whole panel gave a long series of very sophisticated answers about wear. You probably can imagine the discussion. And then the last person on the line, whom I can't remember who this person was, he said, I've given up. I've given up. I just put the femoral heads on the table, on the desk, as we discuss. And men want to have the metal heads because they find them masculine. And women love the color of ceramics because it matches the color of their shoes. And that's how they choose. And of course, everybody laughed in the audience. But there was a deep message there. And the message was that patients assume things are okay, which is not right, but they assume that. Patients assume there is equivalence between providers, which is not right. Patients assume there is no scatter, which is not right. They assume that if they get a complication, it can be fixed, which is not right. And then they make their decisions based on something else. And so we're looking for that something else, Thorsten. And I think turning joints into a commodity doesn't help the issue. So that's my long answer to your question.
Thank you.
Now, I'd like to bring up a point that Alfredo Sanchez from Valle de Lí in Cali, in Colombia, poses to the panel. He says there is a disconnect between the payer, the actual individual who writes the final check, the patient. So Alfredo thinks that the patient really knows where he wants to go, but the actual payer will send the patient somewhere else, and that disconnect explains a big part of the problem. What do you think, Frank, to this question? We may have lost Frank. So I'm going to go back to Dr. Lewallen as we capture Frank back.
So this is
yes?
a huge problem. And the fundamental challenge here is how we work together, not only with other physicians, but other parts of the healthcare system to maintain a patient-centered approach as opposed to a physician, hospital, or insurance or government centered approach. We must drive back towards a patient-centered approach, and this is our job really as physicians on behalf of the patients, because the other groups are less concerned. I'll tell you a true story that points to exactly the problem that you bring up. Mayo Clinic is highly regarded. We've been here in Minnesota. We're the largest employer in Minnesota, so we're an important business, not just a high-quality healthcare system. The only bigger employer is the state of Minnesota. But a few years ago, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Minnesota, which is one of the major private insurance companies covering people under the age of 65 who are employed, broke its contract with Mayo. And they did that because we would not offer the huge discounts that they were demanding. And that only lasted less than a year because the patients who were part of Blue Cross Blue Shield went crazy when they found out that if their child had a brain tumor, they couldn't go to the Mayo Clinic. If they needed complex heart surgery, they couldn't go to the Mayo Clinic because we were out of network, okay? So the brand served us well in driving patient demands, which influenced the insurer. But it points out the fact that quality of care has nothing to do with the decisions that are made by many policymakers or insurance companies. It has nothing to do with it. It's all about price. And that is the big problem in our system. And I suspect it creeps into other systems elsewhere. And what we need to do is, I think, give up on the idea that we're going to go back to the French restaurant model of healthcare, where if you have a great chef, you can charge whatever you want. And if you have a a average restaurant, then you have to offer low prices. Okay, we're never going to go back to that. We have to move towards more a public utility approach, as Kelly has said, where we do this on behalf of the common good, on behalf of the patients, and drive our collective systems towards that concept, and making the prime directive really maintaining quality care for patients at a reasonable cost as efficiently as we can, and then all work together to do that. And there are ways to do that, and even in the US, there are models here that have successfully moved towards that goal. But it's hard, and when we become selfish and only focus on our own individual needs, the system breaks down.
Okay. So I'm taking notes here, and I won't forget this French restaurant model. This is a new one, Dr. Llewellyn. I think there may be an equivalent in Germany to the German restaurant, but it's probably very different to the French restaurant.
It's German beer, you know. Some of it's much better than others, but
all right, we'll go with the beer. Frank, good to have you back. Any remarks?
I think what David said is in our country, that's the truth. It's price who's moving all this matter. If a patient
I think we lost Frank, and we'll get him back shortly. So I wanted to go back to a point of convergence between some of the panelists, and it's the asymmetry of information. And I think Dr. Kelly was not on yet when we had that conversation. And it is the perception of Thorsten and Dr. Llewellyn, Dr. Vince, that there's an enormous asymmetry of information between what we know, what the system knows, and what the actual patients know. How is this resolved? And I'm going to nest the question in this big, larger question. In your system in New Zealand, if there's a large amount of transparency, then the consumers would know that there's a huge scatter in terms of the performance of the hospitals in New Zealand. Can they choose? Can they really move around freely?
No, the options for a patient, we have 20 district health boards in New Zealand, and there's also private practice, which is an option for a patient. They can either pay considerable sums of money, which most cannot afford, or they have to have private health insurance that they've purchased ahead of time. They do move between district health boards for some specialized care. So, for example, not every hospital has cardiac surgery, for example. I mean, those highly technical issues are centralized. My sort of opening gambit, nobody followed up on, but I think the real issue in terms of distinguishing one practitioner or one institution or one purveyor is complexity. And David has hinted on that. Thorsten's institution, I think, is well known for dealing with complexity very well. But you know, when it comes down to the sheer numbers of people who require care, there have to be many providers in most healthcare systems. I suspect, Adolfo, that the system that you're referring to is one where there is very little homogeneity and quality of care, and you sound frustrated that you don't feel it's easy to make it clear to people making healthcare choices that what quality is, or that differences in quality exist. And I can understand that. And I think I'm speaking from a very homogenous system in New Zealand, where we have one training program for all surgeons across the country. All of the surgeons go overseas for 1 or 2 years afterwards. It's a uniformly high quality group of practitioners with the same training. So in that respect, it's quite a different system. Also, I was wondering, Thorsten, is the public health care in Germany a fee for service system, or is it just a salaried physician system?
No, it's free for service. So first of all, here in Germany, every single citizen is covered by an insurance.
Yeah.
Second, every German citizen can choose the hospital where he wants to be treated on.
Yeah.
Third, only the private patients can select the surgeon, the person. But every German can select the hospital where he wants to be treated on. So we are a little bit. We have now a very similar discussion that we had last year in Medellin about quality. Can we really measure quality? What is quality? That's the main question. And so we did a survey in every patient, and we're doing it right now always. There's a simple question: why are you here? Just the question, why are you here? And still, 70%, around 70% of all our patients are saying, because my friend, my relative, someone else recommended this hospital. Yeah. So mouth-to-mouth propaganda is still the main tool for choosing a hospital. And second, around 20% is, of course, internet, and just 10% is, they don't really know why they are here.
But that's highly traditional. That's a highly traditional model. And I think, people tend to depend on the mouth-to-mouth personal experience of someone they trust. But my question for you was, from the surgeon's perspective, is the surgeon reimbursed in the public system on a fee-for-service basis or as a salaried professional?
No. Here in Germany, we have a fixed salary. So I have a fixed salary independently how many surgeries I'm doing, how many private patients I'm doing in my hospital. So I would say 95% of the German surgeons, they have a fixed salary.
So in that situation, it seems to me that it would be the institution that was looking for the differentiator, that it's the institution that doesn't like arthroplasty as a commodity, not so much the surgeon.
Well, Kelly, I've worked my whole career here at Mayo as a salaried person, and I think there are a lot of pluses to that. The downside is maintaining productivity, and some of our colleagues who may not choose to work very hard without that incentive. We all understand that, but I think it really frees you to focus on what's best for the patients, and that's why I greatly enjoy it. But I think you're right. It does shift to the institution, but I'm smart enough to know that if the institution doesn't do well, my next salary increase or the contributions to the pension plan are at risk. And so really it aligns our incentives with that of the institution, because we are joined together truly as business partners. But I think what you have brought up about kind of these larger issues are really important. And at least for the U.S., I have a couple of brief comments. I think that there are several steps that could lead us out of the chaos that we are in the U.S. system. The first is that I think most thoughtful folks in our country agree that some type of uniform national healthcare system is necessary so that we care in a humane way for all of our citizens, whether or not there's a companion private system like many of you have in your countries. So that is a basic tenet. But then, as Thorsten introduced and others have mentioned, we must have registry-based data for national benchmarks with risk adjustment that's agreed on and valid, so that we can actually tell how institutions do. We've had some work here with national databases from the Medicare database. ProPublica and others have published these, but we have concrete examples of individuals who see lots of indigent patients. A guy in New York who was in the front page of the New York Times for being a bad doctor who I know well and is one of the few people that advertises himself as a revision surgeon in that city. No surprise, has longer length of stay and complication rates, but he has patients who discharge under a bridge that don't have an address, and they have something like 80 or 90 different languages that they have to provide translation services for in their diverse community. That's very different than our friends at special surgery, not picking on them, but it's a very different practice, right? So to compare them directly without risk adjustment is not only unfair, again, going back to the patient-centric approach, it is bad for the patients because you discourage practitioners who are providing for the care, for that safety net function. So that's critically unfair for the providers. The other thing is, I think there needs to be tiered reimbursement for more complex cases, and I'd like to hear from Thorsten and others, and whether your systems provide for this, because otherwise the problem we have in the U.S. right now, we have national health care in the form of Medicare, but there's the so-called cherry picking and lemon dropping. So the provider, the private care guys will pluck the cherries in the easier cases, and they drop the lemons to Mayo or some referral center with a BMI of 45, diabetes, on and on, right? And never ever take care of those patients, though they're able to. So, or worse, take care of everyone under 65, and as soon as they turn 66, they refer them because they want to fill their practice with private patients. And so, this is an inequity that provides economic stress. And again, I'm salaried, I don't care, but you can drive your referral centers out of business. And we have had major referral centers in the US, one in Philadelphia, I wish Jay was on, that went out of business, went bankrupt. They closed after more than a century of providing care to the indigent folks in Philadelphia. And so there's not a theoretical risk, a real risk to some of these referral systems in our system when we get it wrong. And then the final comment, another thorny thing that anyone can comment on, how do we deal with the outliers? So in New Zealand and other places, when you know from the data, and everyone accepts that you have a hospital or a surgeon who have results that are consistently poorer, how do we deal with that? And as a profession, we have not done a good job with that in the past.
All right.
So I'd like to answer because so we have some stakeholders, of course, and also, but there's only one stakeholder in the whole market who is able to give us risk-adjusted informations, and these are the insurances. They are the only institutions who have all the information that makes them able to adjust all the patients by risk. And so we are doing it here with the biggest insurance, who is covering 1/3 of the German people, and that's working. Then you can really give us objective informations about the quality of a certain hospital, and we publish these data and that's, for me, much better than the registries. Okay, the registries are important in my opinion. They give us very, very valuable informations, but the only institutions who are able to give us risk-adjusted information are the insurances, and that we have to keep them on board. And in US, I know the Kaiser Permanente, they are very much involved in the registries, for example. So probably this is the only way to get really neutral or objective data about it.
Well, I'd like to ask a question to all of you, and we're a few minutes away from closing, but there's a lot of, I think we're having the connection restarted for a second. Can you hear me, Thorsten?
I can hear you.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, great. There was a restarting of the connection. There's been consolidation of health systems around the world. Certainly, in Latin America, in Europe. I don't know what the situation is in New Zealand, probably different, but it won't be long before somebody will come in and try to consolidate one of the groups there, Kelly. And there's an abundance of evidence that shows that in consolidating, you destroy value. You control the market, of course. You control patients, you control insurance companies, you control the flow of the cash, you control the data, but not necessarily at value. Your institution, Thorsten, for example, I was surprised to see that it changed names, and I started looking, and it was very complex. It now belongs to a group of large consortium of hospitals, and we have a group of German hospitals buying hospitals in Colombia. Now,
it's the same group.
Okay, well, that's good news. And your institution is very well known for being a benchmark in terms of being independent and being standardized, and pushing the envelope. Now how do you feel about these issues of consolidation? I'm always concerned when the incentives are removed from the equation. And there are different types of incentives. They're not always economic, but they're always incentives, as Dr. Llewellyn pointed out. Now, what has this done to the culture, to the incentives, to the perception of the public, and to your own take on this process? That's for Thorsten.
Oh, that's very difficult to say. So we changed, of course, we changed not only the name because we are belonging to a huge hospital chain group who actually bought some hospitals in Colombia as well, lastly in Medellin.
Yeah, we're trying to sell Julio to somebody, but nobody's buying him.
I think he's already a member of this new hospital. Yeah, to be honest, yes.
He's now German. He's now German.
He has a new home, yes. But the incentives, it's very difficult to say how. So here, I think in Germany the situation is completely different as in Argentina or in Colombia, and probably very similar to New Zealand. And I'd like to hear, to be honest, what Kelly is saying about this issue, because you have almost the same health system than in Germany, as I understood.
I suppose Thorsten, you'd be able to judge better than I don't know enough about the details of things. The New Zealand system is quite simple. It's a small country, 5.5 million people. The problem here in New Zealand with this system is productivity and waiting lists and access to care. That's a much different kind of problem. But in terms of driving people, I mean, people are driven to the healthcare system. I don't have to go out and advertise or do anything to attract patients. The major source of frustration is not being able to take care of everyone, and that's another issue which integrates with the theme of this session. But it's not a small problem.
All right, Frank, you fell off the grid when you were speaking. We have two more minutes to go, gentlemen. Frank, if you would have a 1 minute and 45 second closing argument, and then I'll thank everybody.
I don't know where you lost me, but as somebody said, I'm back. In Argentina, our system is highly complicated. It's the state-private insurance. There's 2 or 3 companies. They are building their own hospitals, so they're taking care of their patients at their costs. Doctors say they're badly paid. That's not a problem with our institution now, but it will be because we are having less and less referrals. So I think in some point things will change. But I think total hip replacement is a commodity, and we'll have to cope with that and live with it.
All right, Frank. Well, I'd like to take the remaining seconds to thank the panelists. I hope this was an enjoyable and useful and insightful conversation for all of us, and certainly from the perspective of the Colombian market and the Colombian group within joint arthroplasty. This was an extraordinary session. Julio, if you would like to say some final remarks, and please let us know if this was to your liking, and if we have a chance to be invited next year to continue the conversation.
Adolfo, it was worth getting up at 2 o'clock in the morning to do this.
Goodness gracious, Billy, thank you so much. So Julio, you have to turn your microphone on.
He doesn't know how it works.
Julio, I will teach him in Germany. Julio, prende el micrófono, por favor. Arriba a la izquierda. Let's just give him a few seconds so we can get some final remarks from Julio. Well, as Julio comes back, I would like to thank each of you. I was honored to be able to lead this panel. Julio, are you back?
No.
¿Me escuchan?
Sí, Julio.
¿Me escuchan? Bueno, te estaba diciendo que no me había gustado, que me había encantado. Y no solamente eso, sino que me siento muy orgulloso de tener un panel de esta categoría, tratando temas de los que nosotros siempre nos quejamos, de los que nosotros nunca afrontamos, porque seguramente en ellos nunca pensamos. De manera que yo les quiero agradecer que cada panelista haya dado una perspectiva tan clara de lo que está pasando en los países. Vemos que en todas partes se cuecen habas, que cada uno lo resuelve a su manera, y yo creo que por lo menos los organizadores, y estoy seguro que la audiencia también, están muy satisfechas con el trabajo realizado por ustedes. Les quiero agradecer enormemente el que se hayan tomado este tiempo. Kelly está creo que en las 4 de la mañana y ahí está presente, y él mismo me solicitó estar presente, lo que quiere decir que el cariño y la importancia que se le da a este evento. Y si el año entrante no estás, Adolfo, donde esté este desentierro, para que volvamos a tener una actividad de este tipo. Muchísimas gracias.
Julio, aquí estaré.
Ahorita los invito a que visiten el área comercial. Vamos a tener hasta las 9:39. Por favor, háganlo, y más adelante les daré instrucciones, porque el área comercial va a seguir colgada por lo menos durante 15 días más, durante un mes, para que puedan revisar los videos que ellos van a colgar en este sitio. Adolfo, muchísimas gracias y nos vemos, Julio, espero que antes del año entrante.
Un privilegio, Julio, y gracias a todos. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much.
Gracias, thank you.
Gracias, Frank.
Thank you so much.